Hello, everyone. Welcome again to our new series, Voices of Cricket. With us today, we have Mr. Daniel Norcross, one of the most fun, exuberant personalities on the BBC Test Match Special panel. And obviously, not in India, but at least definitely the viewers in England would definitely remember him for his time with the Test Match so far. Welcome, Daniel. It's absolutely lovely to have you on board. How are you?
Andrew, it's lovely to be on. I'm fine. I mean, we're coming towards our spring and summertime, so
Yeah.
that's always the time when I get at my most excited because
Yeah.
disappointment has yet to happen and hope is flourishing.
Yeah. Yeah, I get that. I get that. Just to start the interview on a lighter note, the moment we open your Twitter, we see that one pinned tweet on your profile, which is where everyone is dressed in your typical style. So, what was that all about?
Well, it was when we were out in Australia. I did
Yeah.
the Ashes tour of 2017-18, and I have a habit of wearing colourful, bright
Yes.
shirts because I don't know, it makes me feel summery.
Yeah.
And so one day, everybody in the team said, this is during the one-day leg, they said we're all going to dress like Daniel for the day.
Yeah.
And in the team, we had Charlie Dagnall and
Yeah.
James Anderson, of course, who was working with us for the one-day internationals, and Ebony Rainford-Brent and Henry Moran, our producer. So they all went out and bought a shirt because they don't own a shirt as horrible as I wear. So they had to go and buy one from a shop in Sydney, and they sort of surprised me with it. And it came into the box that day, and everybody was wearing a ghastly shirt.
Yeah.
I think mine was still probably the worst, but
No, it wasn't that horrible. Okay. Yeah.
well, Ebony didn't really. I
Yeah.
don't know if you noticed, but Ebony's a very stylish woman, and
Yeah.
so
Indeed.
she wore something that was slightly more colourful than normal, but she didn't go the whole hog, whereas the others. James Taylor, of course, was with us, as I forgot, the
Yeah.
now England selector, who's in that photograph as well. So, yes, we look like a bit of a motley crew, really, for the BBC.
Yeah, I mean, the that entire tweet, it was lovely to see that, and I'm sure you enjoyed that as well. But again, starting the interview off, I'll not be falsely modest and just try and brag a little bit about as if I know a lot about the Test match so far, because honestly, we didn't get to listen to it in this part of the world, but we've definitely heard a lot about. The other TMS. We've heard it as the other TMS in this part of the world. Uh, because I'm one of those pathetic nerds who just gets to know everything. We just try and research about everything that is there. So that's how I got to know. Maybe a lot of people in this part of the world might not even heard of it. So just for the sake of our viewers, if you could talk us through those days where you and I think Tom Clark, you started this alternate commentary,
That's
and
all right.
something that took a lot of people by surprise. Some people did not like it. Some people absolutely loved it. So if you could just talk us through that.
Yeah, so it was a very strange time in my life because I wasn't always a broadcaster.
Yeah.
So for the first 20 years of my working life, I did a variety of things. I made money from quizzes and quiz machines, and
Yeah.
I worked in internet startups. And to the latter half of that 20 years, I'd worked in financial services. And those of you with a long memory will recall that in 2008, we had the enormous economic crash.
Yeah.
And I was a project manager.
Okay.
And so when there's an enormous economic crash, the one thing that they can instantly make redundant is project managers, because there's no projects to do, really. So so for the umpteenth time in my career, I suppose, I was without a job. And I'd been given a payoff like you do when you're made redundant. And I've always loved cricket. I've always been obsessed with cricket. And I've always sort of commentated cricket in my head, from a very, very early age, 6, 7 years old. In England, we have a very strong tradition of radio cricket because, whenever you drive away on summer holidays, it would be on in the car, that kind of thing. And so I decided that I really didn't want to miss that Ashes series that was coming up in 2009. I didn't want to have, for want of a better word, a proper job. So I convinced my wife that because people couldn't listen to the BBC overseas, I said, it's an inalienable right of all human beings, Anurag, to be able to hear ball-by-ball cricket commentary. And most of the world is deprived of this right, I said in a very pompous way. I mean, what I was really trying to do was get to sit at home and watch cricket on the sofa. And so I convinced her that it would be a useful use of time, if you will, to set up a website on which you could hear the cricket commentary that was produced by me and the people I played cricket with and some friends of mine initially. And we would call the game watching the TV, and that could go around the world because it would just be on the
So
internet.
this was the Ashes that happened in Australia, right?
No, it's the one in England
For the
in
one in okay, yeah,
2009. Yeah,
okay, yeah.
it was our first game was the quite famous game at Cardiff where Monty Panesar and Jimmy Anderson batted out for a draw, and
Yes,
England
yes, yes.
wasted a lot of time and upset the Australians.
Yeah.
And so we set it up, and we had no idea really what we were doing, to be honest with you, except that we all knew we loved cricket. And because, as I said earlier, so many people in England, most cricket lovers, are brought up listening to the radio as well as the TV.
Yep.
So we all found that we kind of knew how to commentate almost innately, like we'd been sort of brought up with it. But we didn't really understand what we were doing in making the program. Now, what then happened was I underwent a couple of family tragedies. My parents died one after the other. And awful as that was, it allowed me, strangely, the space and the time to devote more to Test Match Sofa. And so we kept going, which is the biggest trick I've got to tell you on the internet, is if you can just keep going, because it doesn't all burst into life in one go, you know.
Yes.
So that gave me the breathing space to keep going. And that's when I suddenly realized, you know, I tapped into people that I sort of vaguely knew. People like Andy Zaltzman came on the program, and Rory Bremner, who's an impressionist, and Mark Steele. And then we got lots of journalists to come on because they'd heard about this phenomenon. And at this stage, you know, the ECB didn't really know what we were, and they weren't really angry with us. So we had George DeBell from Cricinfo and Ali Martin and, you know, various journalists in English cricket. And they would come into the program, and by this stage, we were now hiring a flat from one of the people who was on the program, so we could create a permanent studio. And from there, we did like the whole of the World Cup in India that India won. Every game, except when they clashed. A couple of days they clashed, but basically every game we could do. I think that year we did 180 days of live cricket.
Wow.
And the style was very different from Test Match Special. It was a lot more irreverent. We allowed ourselves to drink and to smoke, and to basically, what we were trying to do was to create that slightly fan feel, but that sense of enthusiasm. And part of it was because, I mean, you'll be very aware of this in India. It's very, very difficult, aside from Harsha Bhogle, for somebody who hasn't played cricket at the highest level to do broadcasting. And so we thought, well, no one's going to hire us in the BBC. Let's just do it ourselves. Let's just have fun ourselves and make as much noise as we want. And we're not answerable to anybody. And we did. I mean, it was, I would say, it was the most fun I've had in my life. It's been great working for the BBC. It's been brilliant being at the games now and working with real professionals and great players and great broadcasters. But for the pure, unadulterated fun of something that you're in control of, you know, and you get to say what you want and do what you want. It was just, it was giddy. And I did that for 4.5 years, I think. I ended in 2013, and we'd been bought by the Cricketer magazine, which some of your viewers may be familiar with. And they bought us back in 2012. When they did, that caused a bit of a rumpus. And so there was sort of, the English cricket authorities didn't like it, you know, because we were commentating without paying for the rights, and the BBC weren't happy, and it caused quite a lot of kerfuffle, let's say. And then after about 2 years of that, it just became, it lost its fun for me, Anurag, really, because I got into it to preach the joy of cricket to people and how much I loved it. And along with a load of other people who felt just like that, and comedians and what have you. And it started to feel like we were the bad guys. And I thought, I don't really think I want to do this like this. So I left, and I sent a very speculative email to the producer at Test Match Special, Adam Melford. And I didn't expect him to reply, but he did. He replied immediately. He'd listened into quite a lot of it. And he said, would you like to come and do a game of county cricket in May? And I sort of bit his hand off and said, yes, please. And so from then on, I've been with the BBC. Test match sofa itself kept going after I left. It
Yeah.
changed. They changed to guerrilla cricket, and they're still going now.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of the same people that I used to work with then. But similarly, a lot of people that you'll be very familiar with. Jared Kimber was
Yes.
on Test match sofa with me for a long time, and the most extraordinary thing in the 2019 happened. We got to the World Cup final, and I looked around the press box at Lords, for the World Cup final, the biggest game I could really imagine being at. And I was commentating for an Australian station called SEN. Um, Mel Farrell was there. She'd been on Test Match Sofa.
Yeah.
Jared Kimber was commentating with me on SEN. Andy Zoltzman, who'd been on Test Match Sofa, was upstairs in the
Wow.
Test Match special box. Adam Collins, that I was commentating with, had set up something called White Line Wireless, which is a similar thing in Australia. Lizzie Ammon, who's a writer for The Times, Gary Naylor, they were all in the box, and they'd all started really their cricketing journey on Test Match Sofa. And it was a very sort of emotional moment, really, because this thing, Test Match Sofa, although it doesn't exist anymore, although its embers still glow through guerrilla cricket, had been, I guess, given birth to, I suppose,
Yeah.
a whole load of people who now continue to work in cricket, and it was lovely to think that its spirit lived on.
Yeah, indeed. So actually, where I heard about Test Match Sofa or Gorilla Cricket is when I was working with a popular website who actually combined with Gorilla Cricket, and they started doing the commentary. Like they started producing the same commentary in India as well. That's when I actually got to learn
Ah,
a lot more about Test Match Sofa. So I'm glad that you mentioned all of those names. I mean, all of them. We've been hearing all of those names in the last couple of years, especially. So you did mention about Harsha Bhogle and a couple of other names. So, commentary as a profession, especially in cricket, it has been quite close for people who have not played cricket, hasn't it? So, you know, do you reckon it makes like a total amount of sense with due respect to the people who played the game and became legendary commentators, obviously? But if you take a look back at all the great commentators, the John Arlott's, the Brian Johnstons, or even you for that matter, you have not played cricket at the highest level, or let it be Harsha Bhogle in our part of the world. He's our only inspiration in that regard.
yeah.
Uh, so, do you think it makes sense for that profession to be so close? Because eventually it is more about storytelling, not just people who understand the technicalities to its ultimate depth. It's not totally about that, right? It's more about storytelling. So do you think it really makes sense for it to be so closed?
I don't actually. I don't think it
Yeah.
makes sense at all. I mean, India's first great commentator was Bobby Tulliakarn, I believe
Yes.
his name
Yes.
was, and he was no great cricketer. I think that you have to be able to make the distinction. I think between television and radio. So
Yes.
on television, because the pictures are brought to you, the storytelling aspect becomes a more technical one, and that's why they like to have a lot of ex-players on, because
Yeah.
they tell the story from the player's perspective. On the radio, you have to act as the camera, so you have to be
Paint a picture,
adept.
basically.
Exactly. So you have
Yeah.
to be adept at all of that. And just because you played cricket very well for England doesn't mean that you can do that. And so
Yeah.
um, on the tradition of Test Match Special has been, for the most part, with some glorious exceptions like Jonathan Agnew himself, who
Yeah.
played cricket for England, most of the people who do ball by ball commentary have
Yeah.
been journalists or lovers of cricket. You mentioned some there: Arlott Johnston, Christopher Martin Jenkins, Henry
Yes.
Blofeld, Alison Mitchell, um, and you know, I always grew up listening to them. Like Tony Cozier, for me, was one of the
Yeah.
greatest commentators of all
Of all time.
time,
Yeah.
and because of his enthusiasm, a lot of ex-players, they don't. I'm not going to say they don't love the game as much, but they love it in a different way.
Yeah.
Whereas non-ex players, we have an element of fantasy to us because we have this romance about the game.
Yeah.
And for me, I always believe that all sport, we should always take a little bit less seriously than we do. And we should always focus, for most people, for most listeners, it's on the fantasy and it's on the fun and it's on the romance. And then you use great players to illuminate that a little bit and to add to descriptions and to really contextualize what you're seeing. But the really great commentators for me have nearly all of them been exactly those people who didn't play it at the highest level, who wished they had, who daydreamed of playing at the highest
Yes.
level. You know, Henry Blofeld could have done had he not had a car accident. You know, Christopher
Yeah.
Martin Jenkins was a decent club cricketer. Tony Cozier played a bit of cricket, but none of them made it. And so
Yeah.
they've devoted their lives to cricket, and they have this passion, this enthusiasm that draws the listener in and makes it more than a game for them. So yes, I think you're absolutely right. It's vital to have that mix. I understand why they don't so much on TV, although I think TV could benefit from it. You know, Harsha does a great job on TV in bringing that sort of that, you know, that everyman view.
Yes.
And let's face it, you know, the people listening and the people watching, the millions and millions that do, hardly any of them ever get to go out there and put on the India shirt or the England shirt or even play county cricket or state cricket. So
Yeah.
who is your audience? Your audience is actually, you know, ordinary, not particularly good cricketers, and who better to bring it to them than an ordinary, not particularly good cricketer, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a beautiful perspective. You know, we see that in football, especially. I noticed in the little clips that we I heard or listened to about the test match so far. You follow football quite closely. There's always this one commentator, and there's a co-commentator who's been an ex-player who gives you the analytical bits. There's always a good mix, but cricket, as you said, it has lacked a little bit of that because we've had Mr. Peter Drury a few months back. What he said was. He also wanted to be he tried doing radio commentary for a while, but it didn't really work out because he wasn't very well aware of the technicalities of the game. So yeah, I mean, hopefully things can change. Yeah.
I was just going to say, you know, one other thing on that is that
Yeah.
for cricket, it's especially important because
Yeah.
you have a 7.5 hour day
Yeah.
now. And sometimes, I mean, I know not recently because of the way India have been playing so well, but
Yeah.
yeah, that can be 5 days. Now, you actually need an experienced broadcaster to be able to fill some of that time. I mean, you know, I've been on air when there's been a partnership going on for sort of 4 or 5 hours,
Yeah.
and it's very difficult just to say the same things. You know, how are they going to get him out? You ask that question 4 or 5 times, and it's boring to the listener from the fifth occasion. So
Yeah.
you have to have people who have got an experience of life outside cricket
Yes.
to
Indeed.
be able to create the light and shade that you need in a long. I mean, it's a unique broadcast, is cricket. There's no sport like it. The nearest you might get is golf, I guess, but even that it's not the same because you flip from place to place. The cricket is 7.5 hours of broadcast, and so for that, I think you really do have to have more skill sets, perhaps that's represented within your team, more light and shade, more contrast than you would have in any other sport.
Indeed, yeah, totally. It does make sense. So, you know, just coming to the current scenario, how challenging has it been to commentate for you or any of your companions from there to England? We've recently had a conversation with Mr. Jonathan Agnew, and he said, I think some software named Swift, if I'm not wrong, which is what
Yeah.
people are using, at least among your colleagues, to help in broadcast. So, how weird or difficult has that been?
Well, do you know what
Especially
was
waking up early in the morning, I'm sure that must be
yeah.
a difficult one.
Well, what was weird for me was that it was how I started, of course, because on Test Match Sofa, that's exactly what we did. We watched the
Oh,
TV
yeah.
and we did it through the night. So when we did the
Okay.
Ashes series in 2010-11, you know, we started at 11:30 at night and we finished at 7:30 in the morning. And when
Oh,
we did an India series, we were doing it exactly the same way, you know, 4 o'clock in the morning English time. Um, and so I had to remember how to do it because I had done it.
yeah.
And I sort of thought, isn't this weird? My commentary life is coming full circle. But I'd tell you that what you realise is just how much you gain from being at the ground.
Yes.
Because at the ground, it's not as if the view is better. If anything, it's worse because you know you're 100 yards away and you're high up, and so it's very hard for you to see, you know, exact amounts of swing, exact amounts of spin. Although you have the best view in the house, but it's still a distance, you know. Whereas on the TV screen, you can sort of see the individual ball better, but you don't know where the field is. You don't have a feel for the atmosphere in the ground or the heat of the ground. All those things that are really important parts of helping you to understand how the game is going to unfold and you can't really gauge the pitch as well and the outfield conditions. You don't have the descriptions that you can make. We're forever on radio saying, and away to my right in the Holly stand, there's a couple of men dressed as nuns carrying 10 pints of beer. I think one of them's going to fall over any minute. No, yes, they have. And down they've gone. And so all of those bits you can't bring in. And you're also, I don't know if Jonathan mentioned this, but you're at the mercy of the producer. So, when you're doing live commentary, when you're there, you can see when the bowler's got the ball in his hand and when he's about to run in.
Yep.
So you can put your hand up to your summariser if they're halfway through saying something, just to say, so I've got to take over at this point. But if you watch TV, you've probably not really thought about it. But when you watch TV, they don't show you the bowler running in from the beginning of his mark every time. Often they'll have just shown a replay, or they'll focus on, Virat Kohli laughing in the slips. And then suddenly the bowler is in his delivery stride. And so you've suddenly got to take over, otherwise you're behind the play and the effects will come through. And if you hear the wicket, but you haven't started the ball, it's a cardinal sin. So those things you realise just how much you rely on the producer if you're commentating off TV. But
yes,
I mean, what Jonathan was alluding to with the Swift stuff was that we were able, and this was a kind of a feat of technology that I was in awe of, we were able to ensure that everybody watching it, we were in lots of different locations. I was at the Oval and Jonathan was in his attic in his house, and Michael Vaughan and Simon Mann, another ball-by-baller, were out in Salford, and Andy Zaltzman, our stats guy, was in his shed at the bottom of his garden. So it was imperative that we could all be synced up absolutely perfectly. And if you think about it, it's quite an incredible feat that, we're all watching pictures at exactly the same time and we're all speaking at exactly the same time. And that helped enormously to be able to get a flow going, But I won't deny that I'm very much looking forward to being back in a press box. You learn so many other things as well, Anurag. I mean, when you're at the game, where you're placed, as you well know, you're at the press end with all the writers and all the other broadcasters. So I'll frequently on a day's cricket, move back and forth between the Sky box and my box and have a chat with, might be Michael Holding or David Lloyd or whoever, to ask, what have you seen? Talk to their analyst. Have you noticed anything? Go downstairs to where the press men are lurking and women and ask them, say, what's the talk? Was there a bit of kerfuffle between, X player and Y player that I missed, and so you gather intelligence all day through the act of just talking to people. Whereas if you're just watching on the telly, it's very hard to keep a track of what's going on actually properly out on the pitch.
Yeah, exactly. And even Mr. Harsha Bhogle was mentioning something along these lines, that when he was working from Mumbai for the Australia series, there was always that 2 or 3 second lag, due to which, especially when the bowler is into his run up, he's assuming that the ball has already been bowled. And so he was not usually describing the moment. He was just like taking care of the after moments, because he cannot really describe those moments. So even it happened with Rishabh Pant's winning moment, when the winning run he scored at the Gabba. Uh, Even for us viewers, the ball was going down the ground. No one had a clue that there was no fielder at the deep. So as a commentator, people actually missed it, and until it reached the boundary, the commentator could not raise his voice because he had no idea.
That happened to us a lot actually. In the Sri Lanka Test series, because especially you can't, because the batsman doesn't help sometimes. So they would hit an off drive through a sort of vacant mid off, and because there was a vacant mid off and they started running, you assume there's a long off, and there was no long off, and so you go, he's hit that down the ground, that's running away to the boundary for four.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
So, it is quite weird, but there are worse jobs. We sort of, I don't want to complain about it, because very few people have had the opportunity to see any cricket at all, with COVID being the way it's been. So we get a privileged view even when we're on the television.
Indeed. Yeah. I mean, it's always fun to talk about all of this stuff in hindsight. So, definitely. And sliding to a slightly different conversation, when England were knocked out of the World Cup in 2015 by Bangladesh back then, I don't think anyone expected they'd be lifting the trophy 4 years down the line. I mean, what Owen Morgan did with that team was just fantastic, and obviously a lot of people who were involved in the Andrew Strauss and a lot of other people. But just the turnaround in terms of investing time on players and grooming them to be the talents that they are. As an English cricket fan, how special was that? And you mentioned you were in the commentary box that very day when one of the craziest games that ever took place. I mean, I'm sure that was quite special that day.
It was special. I mean, it was slightly tainted by the fact that I felt more than a little sorry for the New Zealand team
Indeed, yeah,
because there should have been another super over. Basically, that's how it should have gone
yeah.
until they actually decided the
That's
game.
the current rule in the IPL right now. There's a
Yeah,
second
good.
super over, and if
Yeah.
that even that gets tied, point shared.
Oh, I see. That's interesting. I
Yeah,
mean, for me, you can just keep on going until you get the result, like a penalty
yeah,
shootout.
indeed.
And there was the controversy over the
Boundary count.
overthrows
Yeah,
that came off Ben Stokes' bat. So there was a little bit of that, and I did feel for New Zealand. But yes, look, I think I could put my finger on it. Basically, as an English cricket watcher for
yeah,
40 plus years, um, most of the time, England hasn't really had a plan in one day cricket. They were actually very good at it in the 70s and early 80s. And then again in the late 80s when they reached two consecutive World Cup finals, beaten by Australia with the Mike
and
Gatting
Pakistan. Yeah,
reverse, and then Pakistan.
yeah,
So it's not that they weren't pretty good at it at various points in their history, but they never really had a method. What their previous method was to pick their best players from Test cricket, and then they would perform in one day cricket, and then they picked sort of specialists, but they would drop them very quickly. Whereas what Owen Morgan did was get hold of the team and encourage them to play fearlessly by saying, well, look, if you open the batting and you get out driving your third ball to mid off, we're not going to drop you for it. Just keep doing it, but execute it better. We believe that you can do that. And so that level of freedom, I think, has been really helpful. The calmness of his captaincy has been extraordinary. And the fact that he really does have an instinctive and learned grasp of how to play one day cricket. He's devoted most of his career to perfecting his white ball skills. And so he's a great analyst and thinker on the game. It reminds me a little bit of Ashwin, somebody who really, really thinks hard about cricket,
yeah,
doesn't just turn up and play and use his skills.
indeed.
And so I think that has been really important. But also, England moved away from taking their better test players. Broad and Anderson played in the last World Cup in 2015. And they went, no, hang on, what we actually want here is we want pace and bounce from Liam Plunkett. We want swing first up with Chris Woakes, who can also bat. We're going to make sure we're going to back Adil Rashid because he's got something different. He's the leggy, and you need mystery spin. And so they had a clarity of mind in their selection, and they picked boldly at the top of the order and said, right, we want to score at 7-8 and over in the power play. We don't want to be 41 for none after 10. We'd rather be 65 for 2, because we've got batting depth. And so that is a total step change in the way England have played one day cricket. And you saw it happen almost immediately after the 2015 World
It
Cup.
was
England
a
played
New
against,
Zealand series.
yes,
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
exactly. And Brendan McCullum had come over. And you remember in that World Cup, McCullum had
yeah,
nearly won the World Cup for New Zealand. They're always nearly. I do feel for them. I
yeah.
have a horrible feeling they're going to tie the World Test Championship final and lose on boundary counts. Please don't. It'd be too heartbreaking for them.
Yeah,
Anyway, McCullum came and brought his team, and it was one of the most scintillating series. England could never get over 300
yeah,
before, and they went hell for leather, as did
yeah.
New Zealand, toe for
Was it
toe.
350 almost every game, wasn't it? That
That's
that
right.
series.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it was, and they also jettisoned a load of players and brought in players and said we're going to back you. So they brought
yeah,
in Jason Roy, for example, and put him right up the top of the order. No more Ian Bell and Moeen Ali opening. It was Roy and whoever
yeah,
else was best. Butler was playing, and so suddenly you had a bit of fortune. because you can't win the World Cup without having a good group of players. So undeniably, England are fortunate at the moment in the players they've got around them, but they're terrifically well led, they're terrifically well selected, and it's you sort of pinch yourself a bit as an England fan because you're used to failure with the white ball, and now genuinely going into this upcoming series with India in India playing T20 and thinking, well, these are probably the two best teams in the world. This could be absolutely scintillating, you know.
Indeed. Yeah. We obviously we have some questions regarding that as well. We'll come to that. We obviously cannot let you go without talking about the ongoing series, which had, I mean, so many talking points. I mean, talk about umpiring standards, the quality of cricket. There is the decision review system, the umpire. What is that? The umpire's call again coming in and out as just discussion wise. Uh, you know, it's been a while since in India England Test series especially it has had so many talking points. It's not just the good ones, also the bad ones. Something which we hoped might not have happened. Obviously, no one wants uh, two Test matches to finish in a span of 5 days. I mean, that was disappointing in a sense as well. But as just from a English cricket fan perspective or from a broadcaster perspective, in whichever way you want, how did you what did you make of England's performance in the series? Do you think it was more down to the quality of cricket, or were there other reasons behind a lot of games finishing way earlier than it should have been?
Well, there are a lot of reasons go into it.
Yeah,
I mean, what I would say is that, but put it in perspective and say India at home had only lost one Test match in 9 years before England arrived. So
yeah,
I expected England to lose 4-0, not because I don't rate England's team, but I know that going to India is very hard for a number of reasons. Firstly, because India have got the best crop of players possibly that they've ever had.
yeah,
Crucially, they've got the ability to win Test matches with both seam bowlers, swing bowlers, and spinners, which hasn't always been the case in India.
indeed.
Which means they've got options about how they win their games at home. They've got very clear guidance that they can set to ground staff to make the pitches that they do want. I mean, in England, you would think that would happen, but actually, what gives England the advantage more often than not is not so much the pitches as the ball, the Duke's ball that England use
Yep.
assists swing bowlers, and that's not an art that's well practiced around the world. So, but if you have Jimmy Anderson and Chris Wokes, then you've got a built-in advantage if you've got a Duke's ball. I think the fact that it's very difficult for English players to come up against turning ball because it doesn't happen in their careers very much.
Yeah.
When they grow up in county cricket, they play the vast majority of their red ball games in April, May, and September. And in England, because of the climate, I'm afraid you just can't make dry, turning, dusty pitches in April and May. It's just physically impossible unless you went and sort of put a blow dryer on the pitch for 5 hours. So there's no encouragement there for teams to pick spin bowlers, and so spin bowlers don't flourish, and so batsmen don't face it. They don't go abroad to face much spin because they tend to go to Australia to do their overseas apprenticeships when they're younger. They tend to go and play grade cricket in Australia. They don't play enough cricket in India. I think also the fact that India had basically two better spinners. I think also the pink ball surprised everybody.
Yeah, indeed.
It would be so helpful for spin bowlers on those tracks. I think the fact that it skidded on so quickly wasn't something that England were expecting. But there's no skullduggery involved in it. It's perfectly fair. It's fair for both sides. On some of the talking points, I mean, I would like to say that I thought the umpiring was actually terrific. I mean, if you look at the actual stats, there's been no degradation in standards with the two Indians, or three Indians it was, that stood in the series as when they were neutral umpires. The same overturned decision percentages. There was one ghastly error by the third umpire when he didn't roll the tape forward to check the ball coming off Rahane's glove.
Yeah.
But that was the only time, really. I mean, I think you might have argued about a stumping. There should have been a view from stump hand, but those are the only real incidents that I can think of, and they happen. They happen regardless, and they happen around the world. Australia or New Zealanders have never forgiven an English umpire for erroneously calling a no ball, if I recall.
Yes. Yeah.
So this has nothing to do with being English or Indian. It's just human error, and that's built into the game for me. They're humans. So,
Yeah.
yes, and I was pleased to see actually that the England team and the England team management didn't really raise a fuss, didn't really raise any complaints as has happened on previous tours. I think more of the noise came from fans
Yeah.
of both sides and
Yeah.
journalists from both sides,
Again.
which
Yeah.
is often how it works. Actually,
Yeah.
the players are getting sort of better at that. But I would go back to the central point really, which is that England lost 3-1. Now that means that they won a Test match in India, and only one other team's done that in the last 9 years. So they have positives to take out of it. They have a young team as well, Anurag. So
Yeah.
guys like Crawley, Burns, Sibley have not
Yep.
had as much
The
experience.
Surrey man, Mr. Ben Fox.
Ben Folks, well, I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, great glove work, but
Yeah.
you would say that England did miss Joss Butler with the bat. You could
Yeah.
argue that they could pick both, of
Yeah.
course, but and that was the other part of it that I've got to briefly mention is
The rotation
uh,
policy.
yeah, and look, I think it's a very difficult one. This because I
Indeed.
think
Yeah.
for English players, they're spending such a long time away, and if they're going to play all these matches and play in the IPL, they talked about it and they figured they had to have rotation, which I'm fine with. What I was slightly concerned was I didn't want the Indian public to think that the English team was disrespecting India by not picking their best side for every game.
Yeah.
But I don't see how they could actually have played all these series with the previous IPL, which is after all an Indian competition,
Yeah.
and then the IPL afterwards, which is also an Indian competition. They're giving quite a lot of their time to what is basically Indian cricket. And I know it doesn't look perfect, but the BCCI doesn't even release Indian players to play in England for
Yeah.
domestic tournaments. So
We get that. Yeah.
something has to give somewhere, and I'm
Yeah.
afraid that's what did, and it didn't help England. It meant they lost services of Moeen Ali after one game, and they lost Josh Butler after one game. And Johnny Best had gone home and lost his form. So, but I don't think ultimately it would have made any difference to the final result. India are a better side in their conditions than England were in those conditions, and so Test cricket tends to reward the better side.
Indeed, yeah, that's a beautiful way to put it. In fact, yeah, I we even we can agree. It was mostly the journalists who made a lot of the noise, as far as that
Yes.
is concerned. Being one myself, I can add to that. There's this thing we started noticing, especially in recent years, when because of the pandemic, not recent years, recent months, because of the pandemic, obviously the empires only we were not. I mean, any country is not able to bring out empires from outside, so they have to be umpires who are locals. So we Indian fans made a lot of fuss about it in Australia as well. So whenever there is an LBW who's been given out and there's an empire's call, this is new thing I started noticing. It did look not out on the naked eye. This was biased. I mean, this is, and we started hearing that a lot during the England series as well. We on our we do a lot of talk shows, like daily talk shows, and we get a couple of English cricket fans who live in England as well. Even they started doing, I mean, this has been happening like across the world now. I mean, about this sort of ignited the debate as to whether or not umpires call should be, or should not be a part of the game. And we asked this question to Mr. David Gower, and he said, he quite interestingly put a perspective saying, if umpire's call is scrapped, the importance of the empire is taken out like almost 60 to 70%, and it's sort of, you'll see more of the games finishing in 2 or 3 days than you see now. I get where that is coming from. uh, what is your call, and what is your take on this?
Well, I think, yeah, I think there's nothing wrong with it the way it is. I've got to
Yeah.
say, you could say that if it's umpire's call, then it's not out every time, or you could say if it's umpire's call, it's out every time. If people want consistency,
Yeah.
I think David's absolutely right. If you said umpire's call is always going to be out, then you don't take into account why umpire's call is there. I mean,
Yeah.
I spoke to a dear friend of mine, Kartikeya Dutt, who's a cricketing view on Twitter, who's very passionate about this. And I said to him, rather passionately myself, I said, surely you get rid of umpire's call for impact, because that's recording an event that did happen. A bit like, in tennis, where Hawkeye records where the ball landed. Whereas the bit after it's impacted on the pad is predictive.
Yeah.
So that might have a margin of error. And I thought I'd solved at least one problem. And he pointed out to me, absolutely correct, 'cause I'm afraid he's a forensic genius. He's got to go.
Yeah. Yeah.
He said, no, Daniel, you don't understand. So, okay, here we go. But he was right. Um, the point of impact often happens, well, almost certainly will happen between frames, because there are 24 frames a second, and the speed of a cricket ball means
Yeah.
that the actual point of impact will not be the exact moment you're seeing. It'll be a fraction before or a fraction after. So what they're taking is their best guess. Now, that means there is doubt. Now, if you take away umpire's call, what you're basically saying is, we don't think there's a point in an umpire. We may as well just take everything upstairs. The third umpire will just decide. And I guess you can do that if you want, but I think this pursuit of
It kills the
perfection,
aestheticity a little bit, doesn't it?
it does. And also, you're not going to get perfection even then, because the technology isn't perfect. Because
Indeed.
for that very reason, it can't be absolutely precise about where the impact was.
Yep.
Do we believe it's absolutely precise about where it's hitting the stumps? It's very frustrating when it goes against your team, but that's the point about sport, isn't it? And
Yep.
that's why I come back to the thing I said earlier. We need to take the temperature down a bit. We can be enthusiastic and love the game and be really, really love seeing it and really revel in our team's success. But let's remember that when our team doesn't get success, or they're a bit, if you like, unlucky, or they don't seem to be getting the rub of the green, as long as nobody here is cheating or being incompetent, then you just take it. I'm afraid that's just fate. That's the way it's going to go.
Yeah, I mean, I get where Indian fans come from as far as this is concerned, because Virat Kohli, especially in the past, has been dismissed so many number of times on umpire's call, starting from that semi-final which we lost to New Zealand in 2019 and plenty of other games. So obviously, I mean, our
Yeah, but
fans do have a lot of
that's because he's very good. You see,
yeah,
the thing about umpire's call is that a bowler, in order to get a player as good as Kohli out,
yeah,
has to hit the very top of off stump or the very top of leg stump, right? Which
yeah,
is basically umpire's call area.
yeah.
Like like if it was me, he could hit the middle stump. It would thud into my pad, and I'd be on my bike. But the better you are, the more
Yeah.
likely you are to be out on umpire's call, because you'll have covered up the stumps most of the time. Because you're very good.
Yeah, the margin of error is just
That's
too
right.
tight. It's just too
That's
tight.
right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, I've never heard it. I've never really saw it this way. So thank you for that perspective, I'd say. Uh, and coming, I know we've requested not a lot of your time, but uh,
That's all right.
talking about the current the series that is going to happen, as you rightly put, it's going to be between two of the very best T20 sides in the world right now, and England have such a bomb of a side, and so, I mean India have a decent side as well. So what are your expectations in the series?
Well, I think it's going to be it should be a thriller. I
Yeah,
think England have eyed up this series as a very important one, because obviously there's a T20 World Cup in India.
yeah,
And India are very generously allowing a lot of England's players to play in the IPL. So it reminds me a little bit, when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s, that the West Indians used to come and play county cricket all
yeah,
summer. And then they'd play at England in 1976, 80, 84. And all these players that turned up knew English conditions inside out, because they'd all played in England
yeah,
with the red ball. Now you look at the England team that's out there for this series, the likes of Chris Wokes, Josh Buttler, Johnny Bairstow, Owen Morgan, Jofra Archer. These are all guys who have played a lot of T20 cricket in India, so they've got a lot of experience. They are some of the best white ball players in the world, and they're up against a team which has got some of the best white ball players in the world playing on pitches, and I think the pitches that are going to probably be conducive to run scoring. So it'll be a bit of a shootout, I think, between two very powerful batting lineups. It's really going to be interesting. Jofra Archer, I think, needs to be fit for England in those conditions, because he is a very special T20 bowler, as we've seen. Through the last IPL, his numbers
yes,
were quite extraordinary by comparison with other seam bowlers, and especially new ball bowlers. I'm not going to predict who's going to win it, because I think that's a fool's errand. I think the
yeah,
two sides are so well matched that it could go either way. But I think I hope is going to be really good for this series is that both sides need to find their best T20 combination by the time of the World Cup, which you don't get many opportunities to to play T20 internationals. You don't play enough. England certainly don't play enough of them. So I expect them really to try to find and get their best 11 on the pitch. And I suspect India are going to want to do a similar thing because, again, playing IPL is one thing, but actually making sure you've got the right balance in your own team for your own conditions of the players you got. The problem India have got is that they have so many to choose from, partly because of the IPL, partly because of the size of the country, partly because of the talent pool, that picking that right balance, that right 11 is going to be their challenge. And seeing how they go about that is going to be fascinating to me to see what they think is their perfect combination. And the same for England, actually, to see what the management thinks is their perfect T20 lineup. Yeah. So I should say that, some people say it's only T20 cricket. And I'm one of those rare people who absolutely adores Test cricket and absolutely adores T20 cricket. And I don't find it difficult to say that. It's like an athletics fan who loves the 100 meters and loves the 10,000 meters.
Yeah.
Why can't you? I mean, it's still cricket. So I'm very enthusiastic and excited for this series.
Just a final one. I mean, there's been a lot of talk. Obviously, I know we did address it a little bit, but do you think England prioritizing so much towards the white ball is it really hampering the quality of the test side? Do you think so?
No, I don't really, and I'll tell you why. Because I think actually the players that England have identified for their test outfit over the next couple of years are players who won't really be playing white ball cricket. The likes of Crawley, Sibley, Burns, Ollie Pope could do in the future, but at the moment he's concentrating on red ball cricket. Anderson, Broad, obviously, Jack Leach. So they've got a very strong core of players who only will play in their red ball teams. There's only a few crossovers, the likes of Butler, Root, Stokes, Jofra Archer. So I think they're able, it's actually they're able to prioritise both in a way. The problem comes with where you find rest for the likes of key players like Stokes, Root as captain. And I think they've done the right thing with Root to say, right, there's no point in him playing a bilateral ODI series of 3 matches when there isn't a World Cup for a while. So, he gets a rest. So, in a way, the white ball team is not being prioritised there for the second half of the white ball tour. So I think England can actually manage to do that because they've got a lot of difference in personnel. It's a little harder for India, I think, because they've got quite a few players who will now cross over, like Shubman Gill, Rishabh Pant, Kohli, obviously, Jasprit Bumrah, Jadeja, you would say, when he comes back and is fit. So I think it's a little more awkward for them. Rahane as well, Rohit Sharma. I mean, quite a few of the white ball players in India play Test cricket, so they're going to be tested more, I think, in their rotation policy over the coming few years than England will because of that quite clear separation, actually, in personnel.
Yeah, I mean, totally. All we can hope for is the one thing we definitely know: the games won't finish early this time. There'll be some good cricket. So we can definitely hope for some good action in the coming few weeks, I must say. So again, thank you so much, Daniel. It was lovely talking to you. We hope to have this conversation once again in the future when things are a little more different. But for now, thank you so much for joining.
Anurag, it's been an absolute joy. I wish you the very best of luck with the sports doyen. It's going great. You've had some fantastic names on.
Yeah.
Yes, and enjoy the series coming up. And let's hope it's 2-2 with one tie with a double super over.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That'll work. Yeah, that'll totally work. Yeah. Thank you.
Cheers.